Segment 2, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. All of our shows are on video on the web, www.ntnm.org. Community policing we're big on. Jewish Chicago is coming out for the start of early voting. 60,000 circulation strong this time. We increase it every single time. And we always find new locations, and it gets grabbed by people like there's no tomorrow. So it's going to be free all over the place. So look for it. It's also going to be free on the web. If you'd like to participate, feel free to contact me. Love to have you involved. In any event, it is election season. And what would an election season be without our favorite election attorney? And of course, we're talking about the Honorable James P. Nally. Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing great, and thanks for having me on, Avi.
Good. And you know what? I didn't give you the fancy title like I usually do. I apologize for that.
You know what? That's all right. I know your heart is in it. So
yeah, we'll save it for next time. Or either that or we'll show it on the title on the screen. So what's interesting to you about this election?
Well, we're really getting into kind of a double whammy election season because we're going to have shortly the November general election for statewide offices, and literally within 2 weeks of that election, people will be filing for the Chicago municipal election.
And they're already getting petitions and stuff together.
Yeah, petitions are already on the street. So it's a very, very, very busy time. It's kind of like when the stars all align at a certain point that you have a season like this where you've got one really busy general election season leading right into a municipal season.
So yeah, I know it's going to be interesting, and the fact is people are even, by the time people wake up to the fact that there's going to be a mayoral and aldermanic election, it's going to be too late to file, guys.
Yeah, well, people have been circulating since August 26th, and the filing period for those who are interested would be November 17 through the 24th of November.
And by the way, just for people's knowledge, there's already 4 candidates in the 50th Ward. I just found out about a new one yesterday. A Peter Sinfetta or something. I'm sorry, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing your name. I have no idea who you are, Peter. But
well, this is traditionally the most crowded municipal election field. The reason being, Avi, this is the first election after the new ward boundaries. So everybody running in 2015 is running for the first time in the newly configured wards.
Oh, interesting.
So, for instance, in 2011, although the census had been conducted in 2010, the data wasn't processed and the city had not yet adopted a new map. So everybody who ran in 2011 ran under the ward boundaries that had been drawn 10 years earlier. And so this is the first election with the new ward boundaries. And that is always the busiest election because you always have, no matter who the alderman is, no alderman retains all of their old territory. Every ward has new parts, some more than others. And challengers look at that and say, hey, I've got a real chance to beat this person even if they've been in office for 20 years because he's only got or she's only got half of their old constituents in the ward. So the other half of the people in the ward really don't know who this person is.
One of the true classics is the case of somebody that used to work for Bob Fioretti. And basically I think, what does he have? His choice of 6 other wards that used to be in his old ward. They ripped his ward to shreds and chopped it, carved it, diced it and sliced it.
Well, the interesting thing is there's a quirk in the law too with this. Now the law reads that you have to live in the ward that you want to run in for 1 year prior to the election. So
left you a message about that when you were apparently on vacation last week.
But what that means normally is that within the boundaries of that ward you want to run, you have to have been residing somewhere in those boundaries, not necessarily the same address, for a year prior to the election. So basically back everything up to February of 2014. And if you have not been living in that ward since February of 2014, you wouldn't normally be able to run for the February 2015 election.
So if you moved in March 1st, you're out of luck.
Yes, but again, we get back to this very strange first election after a remap. And this election and this election only, there's kind of a grandfather clause. And what it says is, you take the old ward you lived in. So say you lived in the old first ward.
Yeah.
You can run in any ward that has a part of the old first ward in it. So let's pretend that the old first ward has parts of the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th wards now are the old parts of the 1st ward are now in those new wards. You could run in any of those new wards. You don't have to live in the ward. As long as you live in the old ward that has any part of that new ward, you can run. So for instance, you might be living in what is now, I'll call it the new 2nd ward, but you could run in the new 3rd ward or 4th ward or 5th ward in that example that I gave you. And I'm not saying those particular wards, I'm just using that to illustrate.
Right.
But the point is that that residency requirement is very, very loose this time around, because you really don't have to live within those ward boundaries, and you can even run in a ward that you have never lived in those boundaries, as long as the old ward you're in now makes a part of that ward. Interesting.
Very interesting. There's one candidate in particular I'm going to have to do some checking on later. I'm not going to say a name on the air, but there's somebody I thought sure was getting kicked off the ballot, and now I'm not so sure.
Yeah, it's a quirk in the law. Now, you still have to have residency in that old ward. You have to be there for a year, but it allows people a lot of options. I mean, somebody could certainly circulate in 3 or 4 different wards before deciding which one they're going to actually file in.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, see what kind of reaction they get in the whole
right.
shot.
Kind of size it up, look at the field in each ward, and kind of see what kind of response they get from the residents of different wards. So it's a really, really fluid election. And traditionally, this is the election that has the most candidates of any election in the 10-year cycle.
I am already being approached by more candidates for the Aldermanic and Mayoral than for the November election. I mean, basically, you know, the interest in it is sky high. There's no question about it. And but you know what? One of the lessons I've learned in the past, the first time I did election shows, there were about 9 or 10 people running in the 49th ward. This is about 20 years ago. And I invited them all to come on the show, and I got almost everybody. And 5 of them were off the ballot, you know, before the show aired. And it's like now, it's like if you're an unknown, and I don't know you have an organization, you're going to have to get on the ballot to get on the show. I mean, you have to file and not have an objection filed against you. And especially in the case of mayor, you've got to get 15,000 signatures.
12,500.
12,500, which means
good
you've got to get about
signatures.
37.5.
Good signatures, right.
Yeah, and alderman is what, about 430 something?
Every ward, again, because they are all technically the same size, although there are variations in the population. This time around, it's 473 signatures, no matter what ward you're running in.
Interesting.
Which is a pretty substantial number.
It is a substantial
Last
number.
cycle, for instance, you know, it's normally based on a percentage of the turnout in the last Aldermanic election. There were wards in Chicago where you needed as few as 50 signatures to get on the ballot.
Well, I do feel that the powers that be would like to make it as difficult as possible for there to be challengers, is what's happening throughout the state right now. I mean, you know, when people try to object, and the people in power, generally speaking, do their very best to make sure that there aren't other people running against them or putting referendums on the ballot or all kinds of other good things. So I can understand that. I think it's unfortunate because, frankly, I think the more the merrier, and I love seeing all these. One of the nice things about the Aldermanic election, too, is you get some really strange people running.
Well, the other thing about Chicago,
you don't want them elected, but they're interesting to meet.
They're great TV, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You know, one of the interesting things, though, is Chicago for a number of years now has had a nonpartisan election system. So many years ago, there was a Democratic and Republican primary, and people would win those primaries and then run in a
as a matter of
general
fact,
election.
You know, I'll tell you, the very first mayor election I voted for, they still had the old voting machines. And, you know, the first lever said Richard J. Daley, you know, Democrat mayor. And then it said underneath Republican, danger 50,000 votes.
And that's the way it kind of worked out.
So I'm sorry, you were telling us about the way it is now compared to the old days.
Well, the interesting thing is I think you will see large fields in some of these wards of candidates. But with a nonpartisan system, in order to win in the February 24th election, you have to get 50% plus 1 of the total vote in that ward. And if you don't, the first 2 finishers go into a runoff on April 7th. So I think these big fields are going to occur in a lot of wards, and I think what the effect is going to be is that the big fields are going to result in more than the usual number of runoffs in April.
Interesting. I always like runoffs because I just think it's more fun that way.
Right, and of course the runoff now, culls it down to 2 people, so somebody will get 50% plus 1. But the interesting thing after that is the people who don't make the runoff, all the jockeying, the 2 candidates who do engage in and trying to garner support and endorsements from the people that didn't make it. Because at that point it becomes a big game of addition, and you've got to get yourself to over 50%, and one of the ways you do that is trying to get some of the people who didn't finish that high to throw their support behind you.
It's interesting, the new signature requirement, it's going to make it difficult for some maybe. I mean, in theory, if there's 10 people running, you need 4,730 registered voters minimum. And then you really need them times 3, and how many registered voters are there and all the rest of it, and it could be difficult.
Yeah, because technically you're only allowed to sign 1 petition for an Aldermanic candidate. Of course, it's hard to prove because the way the law treats it is the first signature is good, and then any signatures after that would be bad. But what it comes down to though is how is you going to prove who signed what petition first?
Yeah.
So, but you are right. With multiple candidates, they're competing for a pool of people to sign, and that pool is only so large.
Yeah, and if you're talking about 50 people, it's one thing. But I know that there are a number of people who refuse to sign petitions under any circumstances.
Sure, and you're going to have a certain number who don't sign. You're going to have a certain number of people who say I don't vote in the municipal election, so I'm not getting involved. It makes it. What will help a little bit, I think, is that fortuitously for people who are trying to get signatures, the signature season happens the same time as the November 4th election. And what a lot of people do is stand outside the polling places on election day and ask for signatures.
Oh, that's smart.
And
I never thought about that. That's very smart.
And it is very smart because any signature you get is going to be a registered voter. They're coming to vote. So
I consider that one of the 2 smartest things I've heard in the last few months.
yeah, so that's a little trick that people use.
By the way, the other one was the girls who were selling Girl Scout cookies outside of the free marijuana place, out of the legal marijuana places in Denver.
I want the Cheetos franchise out there.
But no, in any event, listen, unfortunately we're only doing half a show, so you got a couple minutes to talk about any topic you'd like right now.
Well, a couple things I just want to make people aware of for the November election. We've kind of skirted over that. But the registration process, it's much, much easier now to register to vote. You can register online. You can register, we still have grace period voting, and we're also going to have the instant registration too. So it's a lot easier for people to be able to get registered to vote. You do have to be a registered voter to cast a ballot, but it's a lot easier. And then on the voting side, we have early voting, which is probably the easiest way. You send in a request for a ballot and they mail it right to your house, and you can sit there at your kitchen table and have a cup of coffee and fill it out and put it back in the mail to the election board.
And you don't have to say you're sick or going to be out of town?
No, see that's the change now. It's called no fault absentee. And in the past, there were very limited circumstances. If you were ill, if you were going to be out of town, if you were in the military, if you were celebrating a religious holiday, all those things are off the board now. All you have to say is, you know what, I just want a ballot. I don't want to have to come to the polling place. And it will be mailed to you, and you can cast that ballot and mail it back in. So that's the easiest. There will be early voting in each ward in Chicago and each village hall in the suburban areas. And that will be taking place in the weeks prior to Election Day. So it's almost impossible not to be able to vote if you have any motivation.
One thing I want to alert you to, too, coming up approximately a week and a half before the election is Jim, Nally, and I always do a live election show. Matter of fact, the previous guest in this segment, Larry Supperton, was a spill-in when you were in Boston, for a family wedding. But that'll be on CAN TV. We'll let you know as we get the date when you can watch it live and call in and all the rest of it. James P. Nally, if you'd like to contact him, 312-422-5560. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Avi. Great seeing you.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonny. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.